of the Hist and what we do. So yeah, every week on a Wednesday night, we do a chamber debate. We do a variety of motions. We also do something kind of strange with our chamber debates. We actually, they're split up into two parts. So the first part is private business, and that's essentially just the inner workings of the society. We go through some like kind of weird things. Usually there's no drama, but you do get to ask us questions. So feel free to engage us. And it's basically, we do that because we're an old society and it's a tradition. And then the public business is actually the part you came for. It's the actual debate part. So without further ado, I'd like to call upon Tigran Cinnamon. I definitely mispronounced your last name. I do apologize because I should know it. I'd like to call upon him to take the chair for private business.
I call this House to order and call upon the record secretary to read the minutes of the last private business meeting.
The last private business meeting took place on the 18th of the 10th, 2020. Sorry, the 18th of 11th, 2020, with Avalon Kennedy Astles in the chair. There were no fines, no reports to be read, no motions on notice, and no motions not on notice.
Okay, are there any objections to me signing these minutes as a true and accurate reflection of the last private business meeting? There being none, I sign. I cede the floor to the auditor.
Thank you. Now I'm going to ask a series of questions, and they probably will seem silly, but just go with it. Go with it for me. So, Madam Treasurer, are there any fines?
There are no fines.
Excellent. There are never any fines. Don't worry, people. Madam Pro-Librarian.
The time for questions is now open.
Okay, cool. If you have a question for the committee, feel free to ask in the chat or else in the Q&A function. We will hopefully be able to answer them. Previous questions I've been asked are, how is our day going? What does the librarian do? That sort of thing. So feel free to ask any questions you want.
Who typically asks questions?
Oh, anyone in the audience, or anyone in general. It's open to any like member of the society or anything like that. But yeah. Okay, if there are no questions, Madam Librarian, or Madam Pro-Librarian, my apologies.
The time for questions is now closed.
Excellent. Mr. Record Secretary, are there any motions on notice?
There are no motions on notice.
Are there any motions not on notice?
There are no motions not on notice.
Oh, are there any reports to be read?
There are no reports to be read.
Cool. And then finally, Madam Treasurer.
Shocking turn of events, there are still no fines.
Excellent. I feel like at some stage I should just add in some random questions and see what the officers come up with. Like, Sean, are there any deliveries to be made? Who knows? But with no further questions, I'll cede the floor back to the chair.
And I call this House adjourned.
Excellent, fabulous. So with that part of the night over, we head to private business. So I'd now like to call upon Kelly Gates to chair the public business of the College Historical Society.
Thank you. I call this House to order and call upon the Record Secretary to read the minutes of the last public business meeting.
Personally, I think this is quite an interesting debate topic to be talking about, particularly at this kind of point in history, I suppose, at this point in the year. And I thought, what kind of advantages could we get from this? You know, I was thinking, if you're terrible with names, or if you're like academic registry and you're terrible with basically everything from student numbers to timetables, you know, now you've got fingerprints, voices, facial recognition, you can't go wrong. And replacing Trinity Admin with an invasive algorithm is probably going to get you a system that's about twice as empathetic. Now, I'm sure it could be a great tool for the lecturers as well, I suppose, to learn the names of all their students, just so long as it's not at 9 a.m. because we both know that our cameras will be switched off because we're attending the lecture in bed. But that's the issue, I think, with facial technology, right? I mean, recognition technology. What if they can't see your face? Supposing you were to try to use the technology during COVID, it would never work. It couldn't function. The results would be zero, nada, zilch. And that's because, quite frankly, the anti-maskers' tinfoil hats will no doubt scramble that system's algorithm. Or so I've been reliably informed by the extensive research I've done on YouTube. And I suppose masks would be an issue too, I guess. But here's an idea. Maybe the reason that Trump and the Republicans have been telling people not to wear masks is so that they can use this facial recognition technology to prove that Hillary Clinton, in fact, runs Antifa. Or in fact, I suppose, I wonder now that because Antifa has actually been declared a terrorist organization, when the US government is going to start arming them. The fact is, folks, this is probably the best time of the year, what with Movember going on, to actually spot people in Antifa. It's the mustaches, they're the trick, you see. And this got me thinking, could facial recognition technology recognize an Antifa mustache? I mean, because we all know what a fascist mustache looks like. It's kind of a little toothbrush, little affair. But what I'm about to show you, folks, is the Antifa mustache. Thanks very much.
Okay, and are there any objections to my signing these minutes as a true and accurate account of the last public business meeting? Okay, then I shall duly sign the minutes. I should now like to call upon the auditor to introduce the invited guests to the House.
Hi, I'm back again. This evening we have three wonderful guests and we're delighted to have them here. In the chair this evening, we have Professor Kelly Gates, who is an associate professor in communications and science studies at the University of California, San Diego, and she is also the author of the book Our Biometric Future: Facial Recognition Technology and the Culture of Surveillance. She holds a PhD in communication research from the University of Illinois, and her research focuses on the political and social implications of computerization and the automation of surveillance in the United States. In our prop guest this evening, or proposition guest this evening, is Van Geer. She is the Deputy Director of Fight for the Future, a nonprofit advocacy group which campaigns for a variety of causes related to technology and digital rights. Fight for the Future's Ban Facial Recognition project was the first major national campaign calling for a federal ban on law enforcement use of facial recognition technology, and it has been endorsed by 30 major organizations. Aside from her advocacy work, she also is a musician and a writer who has been published in the Washington Post, The Guardian, and Times Magazine. And then finally, our opposition guest speaker is Professor Margaret Hu, who is a professor of law and of international affairs, and a faculty fellow of the Institute for Computation and Data Sciences at Pennsylvania State University. She's a member of the advisory board of the Future of Privacy Forum, a Washington, D.C. based think tank that promotes responsible data privacy policies, and has previously served as a special policy counsel in the United States Department of Justice. Her research focuses on immigration policy, national security, human rights, and she has published several works on cyber surveillance. And I mean, I'm almost out of breath introducing all those fine guests, and I'm delighted that they're here this evening. And we might trash technology, but it's delightful to have three US-based guests this evening, thanks to Zoom. So we're absolutely delighted to have such esteemed guests this evening for this debate. I would like to just take this opportunity to run through some standing orders for this evening. So speeches will be 7 minutes in length for students and 10 minutes for our guest speakers. The first and last minute is protected. What is it protected from? It's protected from points of information, or POIs. So points of information are just opportunities for the opposing speakers or the audience members to ask a question of the speaker. To ask that question, feel free to type into the chat POI along with the question, or else you can ask the question through our Q&A function. At the end of the debate, we'll have a vote on which side wins, and that will be taking place over Zoom. And then finally, let me just explain what ordinary returns are. So at the end of the year, we actually give prizes to the best chamber speakers. And so we need the audience members and everyone else at the debate to basically rank the speakers and judge them. So Maggie has probably posted into the chat a link to a Google form. Please fill it out. It's really important that we have these records. And also the winners of these prizes, they're actually cash prizes as well. So really you can make someone's day by grading them well. But yeah, without further ado, I'll cede the floor back to the chair.
The question before the House this evening is, this House would ban facial recognition technology. And I should now like to call upon David Donahue, our first speaker, to propose the motion to the House.
Thank you very much, Kelly. Audience members, speakers, visitors, and indeed esteemed guest, I stand before you today, or rather I sit before you today, to propose the motion that this House would ban facial recognition technology. This is not just a discussion which is very much in vogue at the moment, it is a discussion which is pressing, as indeed the stakes could not be higher. My speech today shall centre around 3 main points. First, I shall define facial recognition technology and frame this debate around privacy. As first speaker, this is my responsibility. Following on from this, I shall make the point that even when facial recognition works as intended to, which it does not always, it is a bad thing all in all for society. And lastly, I shall make the point that facial ID does indeed not always work. And when it fails, its harms are multiplied by indeed orders of magnitude. As opening proposition, as I have already indicated, it falls on me to define facial recognition technology, and I shall be using the definition given to us courtesy of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, namely that facial recognition technology is a method of identifying or verifying the identity of an individual using their face. Facial recognition systems can be used to identify people in photos, videos, or in real time. I can differentiate this from CCTV in a very simple and indeed an obvious way. CCTV requires human oversight, whereas facial recognition technology works on a mainly autonomous AI-led basis. So, as I have previously said, this debate pertains to privacy in essence. So what is privacy and why does it matter? In the post-9/11 world, we have been fed a certain rhetoric. It is a rhetoric we are all familiar with and are intimately familiar with if we have been through US customs, namely that we must forgo some privacy in order for safety to be maintained. This, however, I would respectfully submit, is a fallacy. Privacy is not a foil to safety, but rather it is the method by which we are kept safe. When we wish to feel secure, we lock our doors, we close our curtains, or indeed we turn off our cameras. And this gives us safety in privacy. So moving on to my second point, when facial recognition works as it is intended to do, it still operates in a way which is contrary to the legitimate aims of a civil society. I can prove this by way of a report issued by the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board, which was tasked with examining US-led dragnet operations post the Snowden revelations, in which it was found that there was not a single example in which surveillance had advanced safety and or stopped a terrorist attack. So the question we're left with is, why did it exist? It served quantifiably no legitimate interest, and only came to light following the leak of an internal employee. And how was he rewarded for this selfless act of safeguarding civil liberties? He was sent into exile. So we have a precedent, as painfully legalistic of me it is to say, that when technology is available to use by governments, when they deem it able to aid security concerns, however baseless this claim may be, they will nevertheless use it to the detriment of our collective civil liberties and our collective privacy. And as such, it is on every single member of our free-thinking civil society to fight against totalitarianism creeping into our world. And friends, it is submitted that by allowing facial recognition to be deployed in this manner, we shall reach a point in which civil liberties become a thing of the past. Now, I understand my totalitarianism point is far, but I shall demonstrate that this is within the bounds of possibilities. And I will demonstrate this by way of an examination of the Xinjiang region of northwestern China, by which a sophisticated array of information technology is deployed in order to suppress the Uyghur minority. This includes cell phone tracking, big data perusal, Wi-Fi sniffing, and crucially, facial recognition. Data is collected on who you talk to, where you go, and what areas you spend time in. This, in conjunction with all of the data garnered through the aforementioned means, has led the Chinese state being able to quantify which members are in need of an education in their re-education camps, which up until quite recently, the Chinese government denied their very existence. So what do we garner from this examination? When totalitarianism and facial recognition technology are combined, we are left with a disaster waiting to happen. It falls on the other side of the house to rationalize why this type of technology should be allowed into the hands of extremists. This is not merely a hypothetical, this is reality. And a reality that a worldwide undertaking to ban this technology could fix. And for this reason, the proposition wins. So the precedent is clear. If new technology is developed, which the state can use for surveillance, the inevitable conclusion is that it shall be deployed as such to our collective detriment. Perhaps the opposition will state that Pandora's box has been opened. We cannot close it. And we must simply resign ourselves to the Orwellian notion of the Ministry of Truth. But I would argue the opposite. However, the point of no return is approaching, and it is approaching fast. And as such, we must fight tooth and nail to ensure that we continue to live in a free society. And remember, as I have previously stated, privacy is not the enemy, it's the means by in which we are kept safe. So now moving to my third and final point, let's remember facial recognition does not always work properly. Take, for instance, the case of Steve Talley. Steve Talley was charged with 2 bank robberies in Denver in 2014. Police arrested him based on surveillance video, which purported to give a positive facial recognition mask. While arresting him, the police used very aggressive methods of apprehension. No doubt the police officers felt vindicated in the severely aggressive behavior, as they viewed the facial recognition technology to be infallible. This aggression included beating him with the butt of their rifles and shouting, and I quote, "So you like to fuck with my brothers in blue," while another stood in his face and cracked 2 of his teeth. The charges were dropped. They were baseless. The algorithm had failed. Not only at this stage have I shown a clear issue in relation to when this technology works, as it is intended to, but these issues are amplified by orders of magnitude in situations where the technology is flawed. As such, we are left with no choice. For the future of the civilized world and for our basic freedoms, we must ban facial recognition technology. And this is why the proposition wins. For these reasons and more, I am happy to propose this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, David Donahue. And now I'd like to call our second speaker for the motion, Marie Bishop.
Hello. Okay. Advancements in technology are everywhere, from our online banking apps to self-checkouts at the store. At one point in time, mobile phones were seen as revolutionary, and now they're commonplace. These advancements may seem mundane now, But many faced opposition, like the fear that self-checkouts would steal people's jobs or that online banking would make our money less safe and secure. And now a new life-changing technology has been developed and it is again facing opposition. And while I understand some of the fear surrounding it, I am now going to explain the many benefits of facial recognition technology and why it is soon going to be essential in our lives. I'm going to discuss the security benefits, the increase in privacy it brings, and the potential it has to make our everyday lives more convenient. I'm also going to acknowledge the flaws that facial recognition technology currently has and the ways they can be fixed. I'm going to start with the societal security that facial recognition technology provides. Obviously, the premise of facial recognition software is that it recognizes faces. This means that it can track faces, and therefore it can track people if circumstances require it. Let's discuss a petty crime that will become obsolete with the introduction of facial recognition technology. That crime is stealing. It's currently easier than it should be to steal from people. You take the item when someone isn't looking, and as long as you get away before they realize it's gone, you've gotten away with it. But what if the security camera footage wasn't a grainy mess? What if it could distinguish your face and track which streets you walked down as you hurried away? You'd be far more likely to get caught. In this way, facial recognition technology could be a preventative measure, as it would be a deterrent for anyone considering stealing because they know there's a high chance that they'll be caught. And even if people aren't deterred, they'll still be caught because they'll be recognized on camera. And what about more serious, far-reaching crimes? What about murderers who flee the area quickly? Well, if security cameras are permitted to use facial recognition technology, then that person's movements can be tracked because the security cameras can be programmed to look for specific faces. Then these people can be tracked down and forced to face trial. I know that there are concerns that this technology might at times be inaccurate, and so I would like to assure you all that this technology alone is not enough to convict. Other evidence like DNA might be necessary, but this technology would surely make it easier to catch and convict perpetrators of crimes. And what does this mean for the wider society? It means that dangerous people can be tracked down and face trial for their crimes, which will make society safer. I would now like to move on to my second point, which is that our ability to keep our information private will increase with the widespread use of facial recognition technology. I know that there are concerns that facial recognition software can breach your right to privacy. However, I feel that the complete opposite is true. It further upholds your right to privacy. Facial recognition technology is already employed by many companies involved in the production of mobile phones, such as Apple. These companies have used facial recognition technology to give you the option of making your phone almost impenetrable by other people. And the way they have done this is by making it so that your face can unlock your phone. Your face is unique to you. And so if you use this option available to you, there is no way for other people to gain access to your phone without your immediate permission. Before this, passwords were used or thumbprints were used, and these are not the most secure way to guard the personal information that is on your phone. Someone could... Yes?
Yeah, just in terms of that one thing, what if you're wearing a mask, which everyone should be wearing?
For the purposes of unlocking your phone, I think it would be acceptable to pull your mask down to unlock your phone and then put your mask back up. But thank you for your POI. Thank you. Before this, yes, so someone can watch you type in your password and then be able to gain access to your phone. If you added someone's thumbprint to your phone but didn't want them to see something that was on your phone at that moment, it doesn't matter because they can access it. The only way to know exactly who is using your phone and when they're using your phone is to use facial recognition technology, as you will need to be present when they're using your phone. Facial recognition technology also protects your phone from stealing. If this tech is widespread enough, then it won't be worth stealing your phone because it will be useless to anyone but you, because it requires your face to be accessed. If your phone is stolen, your info and data will remain unseen and untouched, as the facial recognition software will render the phone a useless block of metal without the key to access it. Facial recognition technology has another positive impact. Imagine a futuristic world where life has become so much more convenient. Facial recognition technology will surely be part of this convenience. No longer will we have to carry around purses full of our personal details, like our bank cards. If your face is linked to your bank account, scanners at tills will make it possible for you to use your money without a bank card. And it will reduce the threat of fraud because no one will be able to steal your money when they don't have your face. And you no longer have a bank card. But yes, go ahead.
Are you arguing convenience over civil liberties?
I'm arguing that the use of facial recognition technology doesn't take away your civil liberties, and that it protects your privacy and also increases the security of the wider society. And then on top of that, it also provides you with more convenience in your life. Thank you for your point. Yes, so there are numerous ways facial recognition software can make your life more convenient. Another way is that you'll never ruin a night out again by leaving your tickets at home. No longer will you have that moment of panic when you realize you've left your tickets at home. No longer will you have to risk being late to go back and get them. In an idealistic future, scanners at entrances will verify your identity and will grant you entrance to theaters and arenas. There are countless other ways facial recognition technology can make life more convenient. I would now like to address one of the biggest flaws that facial recognition technology has, and that is the fact that it almost flawlessly recognizes white men, but has more difficulty with women or Black people, with particular problems recognizing Black women. This is a massive problem that stems from the biases of the people who created the technology. However, the fact that it can recognize white men almost flawlessly means that there is potential it could recognize anyone almost flawlessly. It is not the technology's fault that the people who worked on it had unconscious biases. The technology isn't inherently bad. More effort needs to be put into making it recognize all people equally. More diverse project groups need to work in the technology. More Black women need to be given the opportunity to be part of the development of this technology, because their input will lessen the biases that this program technology will perpetrate. It is possible to fix facial recognition technology so it is capable of recognizing both white men and Black women to a similarly flawless standard, but it should not be banned just because it is not yet fully developed. I have brought you many important points. I have explained how important facial recognition technology is for the improvement of security and privacy, the many advances it brings to everyday life, and the importance of refining the technology so it can recognize all people equally. Technology is the future, and now is the time to embrace it. Thank you.
Thank you. I would now like to call on our third speaker for the motion, Even Greer from Fight for the Future.
Hi, and thank you for having me. I appreciate our speaker from the opposition for meeting some of these issues head on. I think often in these debates about facial recognition, we hear a lot of doom and gloom, basically saying, if we don't implement this type of surveillance, you're all going to die, or your children are going to die, or there will be terrorist attacks every other day. So I appreciate the acknowledgement that there are many ways that this technology is being proposed to be interwoven into our society. And I'm going to kind of address those pieces point by point. I want to start by addressing the last point about bias, because I think a tremendous amount of the conversation around facial recognition has centered on this issue of bias and the ways that the technology itself is flawed. I think it is important to focus on that, particularly since this technology is being actively used by law enforcement right now. For example, it's being used in the city of Detroit, which has an 80% African-American population. At least 2 Black men in Detroit have been falsely arrested because of a facial recognition match caused by algorithmic bias. So bias is a serious issue that is currently impacting people and putting people's lives in danger in the United States. But it's really the tip of the iceberg with this technology. And as our speaker from the opposition acknowledged, these algorithms can and will improve. And I think it's very likely that within a short number of years, we will see facial recognition algorithms that work for all kinds of faces and work, where we're able to eradicate that type of bias. But that's why it's important that we take 2 steps back and look at the overall impact that technology like this has on our society. Facial recognition at its core is a process of automation, right? Humans can do facial recognition. We can look through a book of photographs and say, this photograph looks like this one. All facial recognition does is it uses a computer to do that at a massive scale, much, much faster than humans could do it ourselves. That is really what's at the crux of this. Facial recognition is about automating and speeding up existing processes. And when many of those existing processes have discrimination baked into them from their core, automating and speeding up these processes means exacerbating that discrimination, sometimes to catastrophic levels. Facial recognition enables, as the opposition acknowledged, mass tracking of almost everyone in a society. That is essentially like walking around with your driver's license held up to your face. it is similar to what we've seen kind of historical, there, you can draw a direct historical line. And in fact, Professor Simone Brown in her book, Dark Matters, has done so from the lantern laws in the United States post-slavery all the way through to facial recognition as a tool for subjugation and obedience of the population. I want to talk about privacy because I think we think of privacy as about freedom to be private, to hide things from others. I think it's crucial when we talk about a technology like facial recognition that enables mass surveillance. So not just targeted surveillance of an individual, but the tracking of an entire population. That eradicates the ability for discourse to occur in private. And if we look back here in the United States, we're now celebrating 50 plus years of the LGBTQ rights movement, which has made tremendous societal gains over the last number of decades. If the US government had facial recognition at a time when homosexuality was still criminalized in most states in the US, it's hard to imagine that this movement could ever have formed. Our movement formed by people being able to meet secretly in private, in bars and restaurants and cafeterias. If those people were being able, if the government had the ability to track those people down and arrest the leaders of our movement simply for speaking out, we probably would not be here where we are today. Facial recognition sort of creates no space at the margins. At its core, if it is realized to the fullest extent the way that technology companies and law enforcement agencies would like to use it, it would lead to a world where there is no room to test whether our laws are just, because as the opposition speaker noted, it would enable laws to be enforced 100% of the time, whether it's littering or murder. And not being able to differentiate between those two things means we wouldn't, for example, be having national conversations about whether marijuana should be criminalized, or national conversations around whether consensual sexual activity between adults should be criminalized. All of those evolutions in our society have been enabled by privacy, by our ability to get together and talk about things that were seen as taboo not very long ago. So for me, privacy is not about what we have to hide. It's about our ability as a human society to evolve. And unless we want to be stuck with the status quo that we have right now, a world that is profoundly unjust, where so many people have so little, we need that freedom, these spaces where we can test whether our society's laws are just so that we can evolve as humans. I want to address, I've been mostly speaking about law enforcement use of facial recognition because I think that is, there's simply things that governments can do to us that are much more frightening than what corporate use of this technology can lead to. But there are real and serious problems with corporate use of facial recognition technology, even some of those more mundane seeming uses like using it to take money out of an ATM or go to your bank or purchase food at a store that has implemented a facial recognition kiosk. All of those processes normalize handing over our sensitive biometric information to private institutions and corporations who have a horrific track record of safeguarding our personal information. It seems like every other week we hear about a major company leaking our credit card information or our social security numbers or our home addresses. If your social security number leaks, I don't know if you all have social security there or whatever it is that you have, if your credit card information leaks, you can go get a new credit card. If a biometric scan of your face leaks, you can't get a new face. And so this is why security experts are increasingly arguing against the use of biometrics for security purposes, whether it's entry, exit to a laboratory or for a bank, because it weakens our security. Having a 6-digit password on your phone is significantly more secure than using Face ID. When we get into things like airports, for example, again, we hear this argument of convenience. There's nothing convenient about having your airline collect and harvest a biometric scan of your face and then having that be stolen, which is something that has actually happened in the United States. Partnership between Customs and Border Protection and major airlines here had an enormous database of facial scans leaked just about a year ago. So these mundane uses, I think, are largely concerning because they normalize this collection of our biometric data. They enable discrimination. For example, corporations could show you advertisements based on who they think you are, how much money they think you have, based on your race or gender or other factors that enable them to discriminate. These types of mass automated identification technology are fundamentally about discrimination, not necessarily in the traditional sense, as in to subjugate or oppress, but also just to differentiate one person from another and use that information to benefit the corporation, largely to the detriment of the general public. Bringing ourselves back to kind of as I wrap up here, to law enforcement and government use of this technology. Much has been said about use in China, but I think it's critical that we not make this into something about, oh, those societies over there are using this technology for their evil authoritarian purposes, when the reality is that the United Kingdom, the United States, and many other quote unquote Western societies have wholeheartedly embraced this type of surveillance technology and are rapidly catching up with China and other autocratic countries in terms of our deployment of it. This is a technology that poses as much of a threat to the future of human society as nuclear or biological weapons. Regulation of this technology at this juncture would largely lead to speed up its adoption. That's why we see corporations like Microsoft and Amazon lobbying aggressively for facial recognition legislation in the US. They would like lawmakers to paint rules of the road to say, yes, this technology is fine as long as you audit it for bias and use it in these particular ways. That actually would speed up the aggressive adoption of this technology by both private industry and law enforcement and government use. And that is why we have called for an outright ban on all law enforcement and government use of facial recognition, as well as all corporate and institutional use in places of public accommodation as defined by the Americans with Disabilities Act in order to protect the general public. There are those who say that, as our previous speaker mentioned, that Pandora's box has been opened or the cat is out of the bag. And to them, I would say there was an op-ed in the New York Times about lead paint not 40 years ago that made those same arguments. You might not like lead paint, but it's here to stay. And here we are a handful of decades later where lead paint, now having been found to be incredibly harmful to children and to our society, has been largely banned in almost every society across the world and is almost never used anymore. The cat can be put back in the bag, and facial recognition poses such a profound threat to our children and their future that it should be banned.
Thank you. And now I would like to call on our fifth speaker for the motion. I'm sorry, back up. I'd like to call on our fourth speaker for the motion, Professor Margaret Hugh.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity to participate in this critically important debate. And my research, my scholarship, my advocacy work for privacy puts me usually squarely in the position of an outright ban. But because I've been invited to join the opposition, I would like to explain why I believe that a regulatory and a legal framework is the more appropriate method to address some of these concerns around facial recognition technology. So the first thing I wanted to do is recognize, absolutely, I agree, that facial recognition technology is profound in its threats and challenges. I think that it is critical to understand that facial recognition technology is rapidly evolving. It is not the type of technology that it once was, which 20 years ago, after 9/11, served mainly as a form of identity verification technology. But now with artificial intelligence and the aggregation and analysis of multiple databases, both private and public, facial recognition technology now is far more invasive and far more expansive in the types of reach and the types of impact it has in our daily lives. So there is no aspect of our lives that potentially will not be touched by facial recognition technology. As many of the speakers have already noted, in the national security and law enforcement space, absolutely. It has changed the way that we monitor populations and the way that we classify subpopulations, especially with this concept called identity management. So the use of identity verification technologies particularly multimodal biometric technologies, combining facial recognition technology with fingerprints, with iris scans, with DNA, in order to create a more comprehensive profile of an individual in order to monitor and control movements and access to certain privileges and freedoms. So that is a profound shift in facial recognition technology. But in addition to that, we've seen, as the other opposition speaker explained, that there is an embrace of facial recognition technology and biometric verification as a form of security and cybersecurity, and that it is seen as one of the most beneficial and secure and efficient ways in order to safeguard information security. We also see that in the what has been termed as surveillance capitalism world that we live in and the datafication of our lives, that facial recognition technology is being integrated into ad technology, and it is becoming an essential component of the way that we conduct business and the way that we consider what is considered a monetized form of delivery of goods, services, and advertising. So absolutely, facial recognition technology is profoundly impacting our lives. Now, what I would propose, though, for why an outright ban is not the most efficient way to approach this problem is simply as a matter of pragmatic realism and also the risks that such bans create a false sense of security. So as we know from the Snowden disclosures, the foreign intelligence community in the United States, but globally, are relying increasingly on facial recognition technology. So in one disclosure of the Snowden revelations, the National Security Agency, the NSA, explained that it was collecting millions of facial recognition images from the internet daily. And the NSA stated in one document that they now consider facial images, fingerprints, and other identifiers just as important to its mission of tracking potential terrorists and other intelligence targets. And quote, it's not just the traditional communications we're after, it's taking a full arsenal approach that digitally exploits the clues a target leaves behind in their regular activities on the net to compile biographic and biometric information that can help implement precision targeting. This was a document from 2010. And it was revealed in the New York Times, June 1st, 2014, in an article by Laura Poitras and James Risen. They explained that the NSA intercepts millions of images per day, including approximately 55,000 facial recognition quality images. So what we see is not only is the foreign intelligence community increasingly relying on these types of technologies, but also law enforcement. They're integrating through situational awareness, facial recognition technology with real-time tracking of social media activities and other, like I said, analysis of aggregated databases, both private and public. You see it increasingly used for border security, especially after 9/11. What could we do to roll back the impact? I think that there are multiple legal aspects to this type of increasing threat and challenges being posed by facial recognition technology. So one approach is through, for example, stakeholder activism. Amazon, through their facial recognition program, Recognition, faced quite a bit of challenge from their shareholders. So you have stakeholder and shareholder activism, and you have more corporate regulation through agencies such as in the United States, the Federal Trade Commission. What we saw in the wake of the Facebook Cambridge Analytica scandal is incorporated into the $5 billion settlement, a specific provision that required additional privacy protections being incorporated into Facebook's use of facial recognition technology. So you have potential corporate regulations and private action, such as shareholder activism, that can come to bear to help to regulate it. In addition, you have various other federal and state and city legislation in the United States that is trying to monitor and trying to restrict the harms and impact. So you have, for example, Senators Chris Coons and Mike Lee introducing the Facial Recognition Technology Warrant Act. It's a bipartisan bill that would require, if passed, law enforcement to obtain court orders to use facial recognition technology for surveillance purposes. You have various cities that have passed ordinances that require the publication of protocols disclosing the intended use and deployment of surveillance equipment and technologies, including information on data collection, use, access, retention, and sharing with other governmental entities. You have efforts that also include specifically, a state law, for example, that was signed by the California governor, the Body Camera Accountability Act, that enjoins law enforcement agencies from installing facial recognition technology on body cams, and in part to try to minimize the impact of racial discrimination and the inaccuracies. You have also other laws in the United States that have tried to cabin in surveillance, such as in the wake of the Snowden disclosures, the USA Freedom Act, which included restrictions on the collection of bulk telephoning metadata. And so there are various ways legislatively and through regulation in the United States that are attempting to try to cabin in and prevent some of these harms. And then finally, I wanted to turn my attention to constitutional protections in the United States. So under the Fourth Amendment in the United States, you have the protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. You have the warrant requirement before you have the collection of information that goes towards criminal procedure. We had recently the Carpenter case that the Supreme Court decided, which was a tremendous step forward in looking at the Fourth Amendment as a way to try to restrict the harms of mass surveillance. And in that case, you had the question of whether or not self-site information, location, geolocational data that was emitted from a cell site tower could be considered protected under the Fourth Amendment. And the Supreme Court, many experts wondered whether they would find this type of information falling within the warrant requirement, or whether or not, because the cell site information was shared with a corporation, whether or not it would fall within the third party doctrine, which holds that under reasonable expectations of privacy, if you have shared the information with a corporate entity or a third party, it is not considered private. The Supreme Court, in a divided opinion, did hold that the sensitivity of the geolocational data was such that it did fall within the protections of the Fourth Amendment. And I think that this is a signal of what may come in the future with courts, with legislatures, with executive branch officers, increasingly looking to regulations, laws, and the Constitution as ways to try to prevent the discrimination, to try to protect the privacy, to try to create guardrails that then try to ensure that there is autonomy and dignity rights, to make sure that we have an evolution of civil rights, so that we have digital civil rights, that we might need an evolution of our thinking of the Bill of Rights in the United States, so that it encompasses these new types of mass surveillance harms. Thank you.
Thank you. And I would now like to call on our fifth speaker, Julie Leanne, for the motion.
Right, can everyone hear me okay? Cool. Right, a Gwini Ushla Cummins and Kalashta Accordia for our overseas guests. That is the traditional way of opening a speech to the Hist, except I did it in Irish. So I'm delighted to be here in our virtual debating chamber once again to close the case for the proposition on this House would ban facial recognition technology. Now, I'm sure there are worlds theoretically in which this technology can be effective, properly regulated and used for the common good. However, I live in the real world and it's from the real world that I'm going to argue. So the reasons we should ban facial recognition tech are not all to do with problems in the technology itself, nor indeed solely with privacy, but this forms a huge part of it. The issues of privacy, corporate usage and misidentification have been addressed so thoroughly for the proposition bench already that I can happily run my principled case in peace. So a crucial issue here is that facial recognition technology is not being rolled out into societies where it is going to do good. Marie was talking about how there is nothing inherently wrong with the technology, and this might be true, but in fact our societies, both in Ireland and around the world, are sufficiently flawed that an all-out ban on facial recognition tech is really the only way to go. My first point, of course, as has come up in this debate before, is related to policing. Now, this is linked to David's point on totalitarianism and civil liberties, and indeed to Evan's highlighting of its false identifications in law enforcement. But I'm going to extend this into a more general discussion on marginalized peoples. So I'm not going to pretend to be a highly versed abolitionist, but I think we can definitely agree that there are serious problems with the principles and practices of policing in the United States, as has been in the public eye for the last number of years, but this is also true in Ireland and elsewhere. So policing and law enforcement in general overwhelmingly targets marginalized communities, particularly for the petty crimes the opposition bench is convinced this technology will fix. I don't particularly want to speak in specifics outside of my own experience, but we have to acknowledge that policing acts as part of a system of oppression against minority, racial and ethnic groups. It targets sex workers, it targets immigrants, people with disabilities, it perpetuates and facilitates violence against women, and to degrees in different regions, it criminalizes drug use or abortion. So police forces act as one of the most potent mechanisms of violence against the most vulnerable groups in any given society. And in this debate, as has been addressed, we can't ignore the fact that it is for police forces, it is for law enforcement and security that facial recognition tech is being funded and rolled out. Now, of course, this isn't the only purpose it could potentially serve, but it is the area in which it can and will and is doing the most harm. We're not deploying facial recognition tech in a vacuum, we're using it to equip pre-existing systems, whether that's the police, as I've outlined, whether it's in private corporations or elsewhere. These are systems that already do damage, that already prop up oppressions, that already serve to marginalize those who are already being let down by their countries, by their governments, by their societies. We have to live in the real world. We have to understand that we already exist within systems that are unjust to large swathes of our population. Facial recognition tech is only going to serve to enhance these injustices. Though the right to privacy is obviously a huge issue in this debate, it isn't just some arbitrary fear of Big Brother watching you, that the levels of surveillance we're already under are frankly quite frightening. This is a tangible and serious enhancement of oppression against those we should be actively trying to platform and protect. Marie has addressed some of the potential upsides of facial recognition tech, but whatever good this technology may do, whatever security we think it may bring, will absolutely be outweighed by the fact that it will compound and worsen the inherent flaws in our social systems when we should be trying to fix, or in some cases even abolish, those systems. The key aspect of this debate is the fact that this motion calls for an out-and-out ban on facial recognition technology. One of the arguments against this, of course, is that we should legislate to deploy this tech responsibly. Now, I'm aware that I'm on shaky territory here, Professor Hu. I'm sure you know far more about this than I do, but I do think there are a number of insurmountable problems with the idea of legislating facial recognition tech. So the first links back to my first point, and it's that this technology is going to compound the flaws that already exist in our society. In similar fashion, we can only legislate for and within the organizations and bodies which already run our society. Tightly regulated facial recognition tech for the state or the police is still going to be operated by the state or police, and it's still subject to the same issues and the severe difficulties that exist within those systems, as I've outlined. So the technology may not be inherently bad, though in many cases it is, but our societies are, and we must act accordingly. A further issue here is that it's almost impossible for legislation to keep up with the pace of technology. This is something we're already seeing across a number of areas, not just facial recognition tech. We're seeing it with deepfakes, we're seeing it with data collection, targeted advertising, we're seeing it as social media creates radicalizing political echo chambers. Time and time again, the law has failed to keep pace with technology, and facial recognition tech is one of the fastest developing technological fields. How can we possibly think that legislation is going to be up to the mark? It will almost immediately become outdated, and it will almost immediately fail to protect. For these reasons, an outright ban is really our only option. I mean, if you think of it in terms of something else, like if I told you, hey, I have this cool idea, we might be able to use it to catch some terrorists. It might make your phone more secure, though it actually won't really, because my face opens my sister's iPhone and we're not even that alike. It might do these couple of cool things. It might let you get in and out of stadiums easier, do your shopping earlier. But the toss-up is that it's going to make life worse for every group that is already marginalized and suffering, and we're not going to be able to regulate it properly using legislation. Like, ever. And if we do, it's going to be controlled by corporations that don't have the public good at heart. What would you say? You'd say, hey, you take that awesome idea of yours, you ban it, don't ever come back to me with that kind of suggestion again. That's completely insane. So this is precisely what facial recognition technology does and what it will continue to do, no matter how we try to regulate it. For these reasons, I'm very proud to close the case for the proposition. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. And now I'd like to call on our sixth and final speaker for the motion, Elias Wee.
Hi, hello, can everyone hear me? Yeah, that's good, okay. So good evening. Like many of you, I've been holed up in my apartment, my accommodation these last few weeks. And one of my flatmates is a computer science student. She's very tech savvy. The other one, not so much. One time she asked me to help, and I quote, put the internet in her new laptop. I found her choice of words strange, but this evening I feel a little bit like her in addressing the complexity of this topic. So I only have a get across, and that is facial recognition technology is not the boogeyman. We need not be afraid of it. We need not shy away from it, lock it up and throw away the keys. And yes, privacy matters. Yes, equality matters. Our cherished values must be protected. But should we give in to fear? Is the solution a blind, blunt, all-out ban? Tech dystopian films make for riveting cinema. They foreshadow an ominous future, the all-knowing, all-powerful computer. These dark themes and duplicitous villains. But there are some really simple and broadly acceptable uses of the technology, and it's been mentioned before. We can use it to unlock our phones or make mobile payments. And I'm not speaking from about personal experience, but after a while, typing in the real Chris Hemsworth every single time does get a little bit tiring. The technology is also being used to reunite victims of human trafficking with their families. And for many of us, going through border control becomes a lot less painful when we get to use the automated gates. So wouldn't banning all these things be a step too far? Facial recognition technology is simply not the boogeyman. Now, but you might say, well, hold on, there are some very real risks involved, and the previous speakers have done an excellent job at listing them out, and there are very real concerns, even where the technology is used to pursue some very admirable goals, such as crime reduction, for instance. But I believe the approach to this is not to abandon it completely. It is, yes, to regulate it. And I'll try to make my case here, right? Let's try to imagine Christmas at the Hist. Okay, of course it's non-COVID times, right? Just imagine this, and you're the sort of helpful person, so you agree to chip in with the preparations, and you start Christmas. That's a great one, and you start chopping the vegetables with a sharp knife, and someone else carves the turkey or ham if that's what you prefer. And during the dinner party itself, you notice that standing across the room is this pretty cute guy. You want to go up to talk to him. You drink perhaps a glass of burgundy for liquid courage. But midway into your conversation with him, you soon start to realize that he may be related to you via Uncle Dickie, for instance. And that's when you're in desperate need of a bottle of whiskey. Now, sharp knives and alcohol are things that do not come without their risks, but should we prohibit them? Prohibition? No, I think the way is regulation. In the case of facial recognition technology, as there are actually rules and legal rules in place that already govern its use. Most recently in the UK Court of Appeal of England and Wales, it's been affirmed that the use of this technology must comply with data protection regulations and with the European Convention on Human Rights. So this is a more, it's a perspective from the other side of the pond. And we can have standards in place. Does the technology or the use of the technology pursue a legitimate aim? And is it necessary for pursuing it? is the use of the technology proportionate? Have you carried out your data protection impact analysis? Does the organization have internal rules that govern its use and take on what lawyers would call a quality of law, which in other words is a way of limiting broad discretion? Because the face maps that are produced by facial recognition technology is biometric data, it is also regarded as sensitive data under the GDPR. And so do you have the legal grounds for processing such data, whether it's rising to the level of a public interest test in the UK or in the EU, and or have you obtained consent that's specific, informed, unambiguous, and freely given? Now, I know that I have rattled off a whole list of legal terms, and they don't all necessarily are required in every instance all the time in that order. But the point is that even if we need to strengthen regulation, even if it needs to be given more teeth, even if we need greater coordination at a regional or maybe even global level, prohibition is hardly necessitated. We can use regulation to control it. Even if facial recognition technology is the boogeyman, we can rein it in. Now, I'm hardly a technophile. I do not believe in the heady promise of techno-optimism. And I'm very much inspired by the words of Shoshana Zuboff when she said that recognition is not just facial recognition, but the glimmer of homecoming we see or experience in a beloved's face. These words ring true to me. But what is also true is the role of human agency in shaping technology, legal mechanisms, economics, social norms. And because technology is hardly inevitable, because we can regulate it within the crucible of human agency, I believe and I urge us all not to view facial recognition technology as the boogeyman and simply ban it, but rather to confront it head on, to reap its benefits and to address its challenges. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you all the wonderful speakers. I will now put the question to the House. On the motion, this House would ban facial recognition technology. All those in favor, please vote A. All those against, please vote nay.
So luckily this week I have figured out how to allow panelists to vote, which has been an issue for the last 8 weeks.
Democracy, finally.
Democracy, finally. So that's wonderful, and all the speakers can vote. I presume you know how you're voting. But I'll just take this opportunity while people are voting to just say that if you are interested in this topic and would like to continue this discussion in a more kind of casual way, we're going to be having tea and toast tomorrow, which is kind of the Hist's version of coffee hour, with DU Pirate Party, which is a Trinity Society that is all about kind of internet privacy and civil liberties and stuff online. And we'll be chatting to them about sort of living in a surveillance state and big data and stuff more generally, and it'll be really fun. So do come along to that if you would like to discuss this debate further, or other related things, or if you just would like some hot beverages, which you bring yourself to a Zoom call. So yeah, please come along to that. Just another few seconds if anyone who hasn't voted yet would like to.
Maggie, you're really good there selling tea and toast. Bring your own beverage.
Selling your own cup of tea, which you make yourself. Okay, I'm going to end the polling now. So last chance.
Okay, so it looks like there are 73% of the respondents voted A and 27% voted nay, so the motion is carried. Okay, so I believe that means it's now my turn to take the floor. Is that correct? Yes, okay. So I have to apologize if there's background noise because the palm tree trimmers showed up for the first time in months and months right now. So there they are out there with their chainsaws and blowers. Okay, so I would like to first of all thank everyone for a great debate, and I really appreciated all of the positions that the very well-developed arguments that people took on this issue. I myself, for full disclosure, voted A, and I thought about this issue a lot. And I'm going to but I want to back up before I explain my my vote in favor of a ban. I want to say that, you know, the way that I tend to think about the question of facial recognition technology is from a science and technology studies perspective, or what I'd like to just speculate about is what questions will future historians ask about facial recognition technology, and provide, you know, assuming that it's identifiable as a question even to future historians. If it's so fully ubiquitous, it may not even be recognizable. But presuming that it is, you know, what will they ask about this, and how will they go about determining why this technology and why now? Why were early 21st century societies so preoccupied with this technology, with either developing it and all of the resources, untold billions of dollars of research money that has gone into the development of this technology on the one hand, and now these efforts that aren't actually all that new to ban it, or to, you know, all of the struggle in between, the struggle to come up with some kind of compromise approach between these two poles. And so this requires obviously asking other questions like, what is so new about this technology? What is unique about it relative to what systems have already existed? And then what is consistent with existing ways of identifying people and using the face as and the human body, these things as markers of identity. I actually don't think we can separate out facial recognition from other forms. In some ways, I do think computer scientists, to some extent, and others are moving on from an overwhelming focus on the face to explore all manner of other ways of identifying people and tracking people. And so, you know, that's not reason to resign to, in my opinion, to resign to just acquiescing to the all-out full-scale deployments of facial recognition technology, but it's certainly to see that this isn't necessarily strictly one technology that we're talking about. And we couldn't, you know, there's plenty of reasons why it is worth our attention, but we couldn't simply focus on it without considering now, I mean, people can be tracked without ever having a photograph of their face in quite a lot of detail. And their movements can be tracked. So from the perspective of science and technology studies also, the question really, or what is worthwhile and necessary, is to unpack the black box and of facial recognition technology, or to keep the black box open, as the case may be, to really not allow it to be closed off as something that that others aren't, that's too opaque for us to understand its inputs, and what goes into developing it, and what the priorities are around its design. And so another thing I want to say about a science and technology studies perspective is that this topic of facial recognition technology as a specific, you know, thing that can be bounded is an important object of study precisely because it's controversial. And it's very important to understand the nature of the controversy. Why is this such a controversial technology? And I think all of you have provided really quite a lot of input into answering that question already, so I don't need to kind of elaborate that much. I do think that part of what I often see in this the pro versus cons, or banned versus not banned kinds of debates, is a question of, you know, how much we can trust the institutions, how much we can trust our legal system to address it, how much can we trust the institutional users of this technology to use it appropriately, and even to use it within the legal frameworks that are established for it. And there are people who have every reason not to trust that. And so, I think that trying to close off the discussion and say that this is uncontroversial or it shouldn't be controversial because of all of these benefits or whatever would be sort of premature. I think that this, in this growing debate about banning, I think the banning of the technology debate, and we're seeing this across the US in different cities now and state levels, the question of potentially banning, all of these are temporary. They're all framed as temporary bans, and they're geographically and temporally bounded bans. They're also bans that focus, as has been mentioned, on police and government uses. And people sort of resign and the whole banning debate sort of throws up its hand at, we're never going to stop the Facebooks and the Googles of the world of developing this technology. And I think that is also, unfortunate for us to resign ourselves to that. And so just the power of the ban and what the ban as a legal and political maneuver it will do, and what it can do and can't do, is a very important question in and of itself. I believe that a ban, the way the ACLU is approaching this and arguing for a ban on police and state uses, is really too limited, although I really would be supportive of a ban on police uses in the United States, because we do have terrible problems in the United States with police violence and police misuse of all kinds of technologies, and there is plenty of ammunition for the argument that they don't need more ammunition. They don't need, more power to do their jobs, which they aren't necessarily proving to do their jobs in a way that is of benefit to everyone, and it can be quite oppressive to large numbers of people. And so, thinking about the ban as a question, and whether, how we can think about it as both something, I think that if we don't consider the ban as more broadly than police and government uses, then we just risk the technology being completely normalized by the private sector. And so it wouldn't even no longer make sense for you to also ban government agencies and police from using it. I think that ubiquitous identification would not be as much of a problem at all in a society that cared about the most vulnerable, that cared about equity, that really built its infrastructures and its social structure, built it and designed it to empower and create conditions of equity. If that was the case, then a ubiquitous identification might be helpful for certain purposes. For purposes of you could envision that. Okay, but today ubiquitous identification systems are actually being designed to do the work of differentiating people, of putting people into categories of value and risk, and doing so automatically and at a much larger scale, and in a way that reaches into more and more domains. And so, that's in that way helping to reproduce the kinds of structural inequalities, and in fact, being the engine of its reproduction, as I see it. So, political theorists are convincingly argued that societies that are rife with inequalities are inhospitable to democracy. And so if we want to continue to design infrastructures to maintain and enforce inequalities, the democratic experiments, of the last 2 centuries are really bound to fail. So I don't see these as commensurable kinds of, I don't see facial recognition as commensurable with that. So I also want to point out that, facial recognition technology is made technically possible by camera infrastructures, and it's made technically necessary by those same expanding, proliferating camera infrastructures. So to understand the kind of conditions that are creating the need for it and the possibility for it, I think are important. So like the rest of the IT infrastructure, these video infrastructures are being monetized and financialized in ways that are virtually forcing their perpetual growth. And facial recognition is not, it is actually seen as a solution to the problem of the labor costs associated with managing and making use of the volumes of output that are coming from these camera infrastructures. And the camera infrastructures were themselves ill-conceived potential ideas for solutions to complex social problems. It is, in a sense, the failure of these systems to live up to their promises that is requiring us to look for ways of, technical ways of fixing the problems that these infrastructures have created, including the very big problem of labor costs, of handling it and making use of what these infrastructures produce. And it is this industry, there is an industry that is making their revenues the source of their growth, and they are growing quite globally, quite into a powerhouse industry, the video surveillance and security industries, which are very hard to even disentangle from the IT industries. That it's there that we see kind of a vested interest in a perpetual sense of insecurity, and this perpetual sort of this trajectory, this technological trajectory by which they are able to always be proposing new solutions to the problems that their products have created, including for the police. The problems of new body-worn camera systems, for example, create major labor problems for police agencies in terms of how to deal with the output of the amount of video that's produced by these systems. And so I guess to just wrap up, and I have no idea how long I've been talking. I had every intention of putting on my timer, but I always forget that. I want to kind of conclude with the film Minority Report and just a gesture at it, because I don't know how many people have seen Minority Report, the Steven Spielberg film. It's a kind of 2002 film at this point, so it's almost 20 years old, which is crazy to say. But in the film, it's the protagonist, played by Tom Cruise. He gets tagged as a future murderer by a fictional predictive policing apparatus called Pre-Crime. And the action unfolds as we follow Tom Cruise on a mission to clear his name and avoid the fate of getting haloed. The prisoners get haloed, and they are forced, they are kind of comatose by these halos on their heads, and they're forced to watch their crimes in front of their face in perpetuity. And his biggest hurdle in achieving this kind of, in clearing his name, being able to go on this sort of quest to clear his name, the biggest hurdle are the biometric eye scanning devices, which is just like this infrastructure of ubiquitous identification that permeates the space of the city. It's in the building, it's on the metro system, it's in the shops, it's everywhere, right? And so his first order of business, before he can, start this quest to avoid this punishment of preemptive imprisonment, is to get eyeball transplant surgery, right? He has to go and get eyeball transplant surgery, which he does in this sort of back alley, underground world of back alley eyeball replacements. And in the film, we're clearly meant to identify with this main character and not the police who are after him to try to imprison him. And the story, so, we're meant to identify with him for a reason, that, this story is, it's a sci-fi fantasy, of course. Obviously, it's a sci-fi fantasy, but it's the most fantastical elements of it are not the pre-crime apparatus or the ubiquitous identification system. The most fantastical element is the idea that this lone heroic protagonist is going to achieve justice for himself in the world. And the film, it's really an interesting commentary on 21st century, on our obsession with security and technology. It's an interesting post 9/11 artifact, even though it was produced right before 9/11. So it's kind of got that right at that cusp. And there's a lot to be said about it. But the point I want to make about it is that, eyeball transplants, the fantastical dream of eyeball transplants or facial transplants, those are not viable options for justice seeking. And I think, future historians will look back on this moment as one where modern societies created a lot of problems for themselves, and rather than studying and addressing the source of those problems, they instead tried to individualize those problems and monetize the solutions. And so I support the ban on facial recognition technology for these kinds of reasons, and thinking that, I just really believe, and I'll just put this final endpoint on it, that thinking that we're going to sort of solve the problems of security with something like facial recognition technology, thinking that that's going to provide us, whether it's going to save, protect our data and our phones, or that it's going to protect this nation from terrorists and its enemy other. This is like thinking that the solution to climate change is air conditioners, in my opinion. So thank you for listening, and thank you for inviting me to hear your speeches and be a part of this debate.
Thank you so much. I think Breed, it's over to Breed next, I believe.
Yep. Excellent. Hi guys, almost there at the end of the night, but I have to now shamelessly plug the Hist events. So for upcoming events, as Maggie already said, we have Tea and Toast tomorrow in collaboration with the DU Pirate Party. If you're really passionate about this topic, about cyber surveillance in general, and you want to rant about it, please come to this this event. It's happening at 2 p.m. I'm going to be there. I'm going to be ranting 100%. This is such an amazingly interesting topic, and we'll be exploring more aspects of it than just facial recognition, all of it, whatever you want to talk about, really. Our debate next week is actually our maidens final. So shout out to Sean and all the people who have judged our maidens competition that's been running for the last 8 weeks. We've finally gotten to the finals. Good luck to all competitors. It's basically all people who are new to university debating. And also the winner of it will get an EY internship during the summer, which is pretty amazing. And we're so delighted to have EY as our sponsor. Also, the Phil, our debating counterpart in UCD, in Trinity, has their maidens final tomorrow night as well. So if you want to support novice speakers, beginner debaters, please go to that final. Also, we have our wildcard competition for the maidens final, which is basically just, we have one spot in the final reserved for the wildcard winner. So it's a day-long competition that you can go to and debate at. If you tried maidens and you couldn't make it to enough rounds, or you feel like you could give it another shot, please come to our wildcard competition. If you're interested, there'll be information on our Facebook page. Also, feel free to talk to Sean. He was the guy who gave the funny minutes at the beginning of this event. And yeah, also tomorrow we have our French debate. So that's in collaboration with the French Society in Trinity. It's a French language debate. The motion is, this house believes it is necessary to speak the language of a country to understand the culture. If you are speak French, if you enjoy French, please come along to this debate. It's going to be a load of fun. And then on Friday, to finish out the week, we have a Derby of Rhetoric with the Classical Society. So that will be at 1 p.m. on Friday. So if you want to listen to Derby of Rhetoric, it's essentially just someone speaking for 7 minutes on a topic of their choice. It could be facial recognition. It could be something about the history of mustaches, whatever it could be anything. So if you're interested in hearing about people's own hyperfixations, or you want to have your go at giving a speech like that, feel free to reach out to our Robinson subcommittee, because they organize the event. But yeah, feel free to look at our Facebook page. That's where all of our events are, and you can keep track of the society there. And yeah, lastly, I just want to thank all the amazing speakers this evening. Each speaker had an astounding amount of passion for this topic, and also to the guest speakers in particular, your breadth of knowledge and also just the amount of thought that you've put into these subjects are just absolutely fascinating, and I wish I could have hours of your time to pick your brains, but I'm so happy to have you guys here. And yeah, thank you everyone who also attended, and I hope you come along to our Tea and Toast tomorrow. Also, please fill out the oratory returns. But yeah, without further ado, I'll cede the floor back to the chair to adjourn the meeting.
That's me, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. I call this house adjourned.